You said Americans don't have the stomach for a major conflict anymore. We don't want the money going to Ukraine or to other countries. But also, so much of what we want comes from free trade and free markets abroad, which are patrolled and which are allowed by America's military presence. And so I worry that many of those who want us to kind of come home don't realize that coming home would mean coming home to much less. On the topic of, are Americans ready to fight a major global war? Just from a pure civic spirit point, I think the answer is no. There's an interesting moment in Roman history where they go from a purely from the people military to a mercenary military.
Right.
And that's a dangerous tipping point. And sometimes I feel like we're getting to that tipping point where the people are no longer willing or don't think it's worth defending the nation anymore. I kind of think France when Hitler is coming, right? How are they different than France in World War I? What changes in their capacity, their self-belief? There's something that makes them a unique nation. And is the United States heading down that path? It's something I have some worries about. Let's go!
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to I Came With Fire podcast. Tonight we have a very special guest, Dr. Savannah Eccles Johnston. I'm going to let her introduce herself.
I am a professor of political science at a city college here in Salt Lake City. And I also happen to run an Instagram called Savvy Politics, where I expound on all things Constitution and American political thought. And when I'm not doing politics and I'm not with my kids, I am watching soccer.
Nice. What soccer team?
Oh, so I am currently separated from Barcelona because I'm still getting over some of their mistreatment of some players from a couple of years ago and some of their financial misdealings. So we're separated right now, and I'm dating other teams. Arsenal. I don't know. I'm just kind of
the Chelsea fan. I was wondering what the Arsenal thing is.
Yeah, just kind of watching all the leagues at this point, seeing if I can fall in love with someone else.
Fair enough. I was pretty excited when St. Louis got their own football club. I used to live there, so I was like, I'm going to pull for them. But yeah. Anyway, we can jump right in. So earlier this week, you had a post that I saw it, and I was like, I totally want to talk to you about this. And is the president of the United States a constitutional dictator? I'd never heard it posited that way before. I thought it was a really intriguing way to look at it. Not gonna lie to you, I totally snoop behind you on your bookshelf when you make posts, and I have purchased a few of the ones that you have back there, but one of the ones I purchased was John Yu's book,
Crisis in Command.
Yes, I haven't read it yet, but I was wondering if you'd pulled some of the thoughts from that book for this, but I want to talk about it and what you meant and dive more into it other than Kennedy's attractiveness and him being able to do anything he wants because he's a hot dude. So let's jump in.
Yeah, maybe those digs at Kennedy weren't fair, but I don't like the guy, so I take whatever shots I can. So this idea of constitutional dictatorship is very interesting. When we think about the creation of the Republican executive, by which we mean the American presidency, and by Republican we don't mean the Republican Party, we mean Republican as in representative democracy. Is it a continuation or simply a morphing of the British crown? Or is it hearkening back to something more ancient, to the constitutional dictatorship of the Roman Republic? And I think the answer is the latter, that there is more in common with its function and its purpose in that constitutional dictatorship. But the constitutional dictatorship in the Roman Republic was unstable. You never had a Senate coexisting with a constitutional dictator. One would step aside, constitutional dictator would step up to deal with the crisis and then go back. And so that idea of separation of powers and checks and balances coexisting didn't exist yet. That's kind of, I think, one of the most brilliant innovations of the American system is how do you have crisis government that coexists on a permanent basis with representative government, and how do you actually allow them to check each other against their worst tendencies, dictatorship on the one side and mobocracy on the other side? How do you do that? So I think that's the question is, what do we mean by a constitutional dictator? And I think the answer is no, we don't have a constitutional dictator. However, we do have a constitution that creates an Article 2 that is remarkably elastic during crises. So I think that's what I was trying to nod to with this question of constitutional dictatorship, is the origins of the American presidency and how has it developed over time.
Right. Yeah, no, I'd never heard that before. I thought it was really interesting. So you're talking about where in ancient Rome, where they would suspend essentially the Senate, and then they would have a dictator for a crisis. So when they would go to war or something like that, is what you're talking about. I agree that it does look more like that. George, you have anything?
No, I mean, I think it was I'd never heard that term before. And then when looking through your examples, it was interesting to see kind of the escalation of those powers. I was a history and poli-sci major, so, not at your degree, obviously, to your level, but I can appreciate that was steps taken. And, I would say even more so just when you say with the Constitution, it's very elastic with Article 2. I think we've seen a lot of elasticity with the Constitution when it comes to powers with Congress. When you look at court cases with the Commerce Clause, just that alone, how those powers have started one aspect, and now in 2024, almost 250 years later, they can control almost anything through the one clause.
Right. You mentioned this escalation, and I think that is so key. When I speak to my students about executive congressional relations, I use the pendulum idea that you swing during a crisis to a powerful president, and then you have a backlash, and you have a series of no-name presidents and a powerful Congress. But at some point, that pendulum has kind of stopped swinging. It's gotten sticky, and the president stays powerful and seems to swing even further towards the president. And that's a huge problem for the constitutional order.
I agree. Do you think that more Americans seem to be in favor of it being sticky in the way that it gives the president more power, and that modern Americans sort of prefer that style of leadership now? Because I think I have my own opinion about that.
That's a great question. I worry that that's the case, and I worry from two different angles. One, just if you look at the comments section, the comments are so much fun on these posts. And I always get people.
Crazy ways too.
They do, and people are always mad about something, which is fun. But one of the comments I got was, "Well, what did you expect Obama to do? If Congress won't act, Obama should. Congress was stonewalling him." Okay, but we have a constitutional system, and Congress is the legislative branch, not the president. So you have to choose: do you prefer the system, the constitutional order, or do you prefer your results and your outcomes? And if you prefer your results and your outcomes, then Obama's answer is a really good one and caters directly to you. So I worry about it on that side. And then I've also, the last couple of days, been really haunted by Lincoln's Lyceum address, which he gives back in the 1840s when he's just kind of a young gun in Springfield, Illinois. He says the greatest threat to America isn't external, it's internal, and it will be lawlessness, the mobocratic spirit, which will cause the good men of the country to become so disgusted with the regime that they will seek a powerful leader, a demagogue, who can promise them the rule of law and order again. And so I think in both ways, the desire to get stuff done and the desire to have a return to law and order leads us towards executive government in ways that I find unnerving.
It's crazy because that sort of rhetoric has become exactly the sort of presidential campaigning you see more and more. Donald Trump presents himself this way, Kamala Harris presents herself this way as the solution to all the problems, rather than hearkening back to the system that we should have faith in to fix the problems. Do you think that that's espoused to the growing opinion that the Electoral College should be abolished?
Oh, that's what an interesting question. The Electoral College. I have mixed thoughts on the Electoral College, partially because that system itself was such like a last minute throw together at the Constitutional Convention. It was basically, we don't have a bunch of time left. We don't want Congress to pick, and we don't really want direct popular vote, partially at least because the North has more voters than the South does. Although that was proposed by a man named James Wilson, and he may have been right. And so we're going to try and come up with like a middle ground position, which is basically Congress, but not Congress picking the president, right? But the same number of electors. It failed immediately. Immediately. After George Washington, the Electoral College has never worked as it was intended because political parties caught everyone by surprise somehow. So it has never worked as it's intended. It's changed so much, and it's so up to interpretation. You can use majority take all. You can use the district system. And honestly, I think it would be perfectly constitutional to say everyone just, cast your electoral votes according to the direct national vote. So I guess I'm a little... I'm of two minds on the Electoral College. I don't feel like it's like the one feature of our constitutional system that I'm going to defend this to the death because they didn't think about it all that much.
A lot of people feel that way. George, looked like you were trying to speak.
No, I was going to say, it was interesting. One thing that when I saw your post and we talk about how much power the president has and how it's grown is I've asked this question to friends of mine who are on both sides of the political aisle. And I've said, do you think it's a problem that the president has so much power that every election cycle it's do or die one side or the other? When in reality, if we go back to the way things probably should have been set up, or how they were set up and they should be working, yes, you want your candidate to win, but it doesn't mean, the end of the world or the end of the country if one side loses. What do you have any response to kind of that aspect of, do you think it would settle politics down and political presidency races down if they had less power than they do now?
Yes, and so yes, they actually need to be checked by Congress, but also the American people need to know what Congress actually does. I think much of the growth in the power of the presidency has come from institutional failures in Congress to check against the growth of the presidency. And part of that is simply because we reward Congress for acting as partisans and not as institutionalists. And the second is that American people have no idea what the president does. And so we elect this guy, and then we're upset that he doesn't pass healthcare reform and immigration reform. He can't do any of those things. And so someone who's more demagogic comes along and promises, I'll do it, I'll be the hope, I'll be the change. And they can't do it. And the presidency keeps getting more powerful. So I actually think the solution is institutional thinking. We have to return to a checks and balances, institutional framework for our system, which will mean thinking more about Congress, punishing Congress more for failing to think institutionally, for failing to compromise and to act as a body against the president, and also caring less about the president.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, I think, when you look at Congress in the 1930s, they tried to give FDR all this power. The country was in a crisis, and there were Supreme Court cases where, SCOTUS said, no, this is the president. This is your job, Congress. What are you doing? Why are you trying to pass off these powers to, this president? And I feel like, we definitely need something to come along and say, hey, Congress, do your job.
Well, actually, let's talk about FDR for a second, because I think one of the greatest institutional moments in our history comes from a Democratic majority Congress standing up to FDR. So the Supreme Court has yet again struck down a portion of the New Deal. That's, unconstitutional, this and that. And FDR's so mad. And he's like, okay, I'm done with these guys. I'm going to pack the Supreme Court. I'm going to increase it to 16. I'm going to put all my friends on it. And Congress says no. One, because it's the power of Congress to increase the size of the court, never the president. The president simply gets to nominate for vacancies. And two, they were worried that this would give him too much unilateral control, that it would unbalance our system. So Congress thought for just one moment, not as Democrats, but as congressmen who were self-interested in trying to protect their institutional power. And it worked. That's why you still have this powerful three-branch system. But I think that the but in this story is the very next court case the Supreme Court rolled over. They gave in to FDR because they have to protect themselves too as an aristocratic body in a democratic system. So that was just a brilliant institutional moment that I can't imagine happening today.
I was literally just about to ask you, do you think that could happen today? And obviously you don't. So.
No, I'm not sure it would. No, I worry. I think we would punish politicians who did that. We would punish a politician who stood up to a president who was going to give us what we want in the wrong way. We would rather get things the wrong way and get them than not at all. So I don't think the American people have the gumption to do that today.
What do you think is a way of holding, or I should say, an effective way of holding our elected officials more accountable, maybe in a sort of procedural way, rather than just getting online and yelling into the ether, which is what people do? What is a more effective way of holding them accountable?
Oh, yeah. So politicians want to survive. They want power. And the biggest way to punish a politician is to take away their power. So to primary them or to put up a good general election challenge to them. But in the meantime, one thing that I found that was really effective when I was working in a Senate office was flooding the office with calls and with mail. At the very beginning of the week, the senator would gather all the staff together, and he would ask, like, the interns, okay, what mail has come in this week? What subjects, how are they leaning, and how are we answering it? They really took it seriously because smart Senate and House offices take it seriously. So don't shout on Twitter. They don't read that. Send it to their offices.
And I love that you brought that up because I've had really good effect with that as well within the bureaucracy in Illinois. Illinois has a law when I was applying for my concealed carry license that after 90 days, if it hasn't been issued to you, you can request a hearing in front of the state director. And every week until I got it issued, I was sending him a letter to his office saying, Director, I'm requesting a hearing in front of you to explain why this hasn't got here. After about 2-3 weeks, I got a phone call from his office saying, please stop sending us the letters. We get it. We've fast tracked it and it's in the mail. And I was like, okay, but I'm still sending the letter until I actually have it in my hand. But it worked. It was one of those things, and I've told my friends about that, and they've done the same. And so the letter aspect, I'm so glad you brought that up because it's a real show of force. It's something tangible.
Yeah, they are desperate to communicate with their constituents. They just don't know how. They don't know how to interact. I mean, if you follow their Instagrams, they're desperate to tell you what they're doing and to get your comments, but we just don't care. So you sending a letter is so impactful because it's something that they can say, like, here's proof I'm doing what someone wants me to do.
It's probably one of these things where people think that those offices are getting communication like that, and they just assume, well, I'm not going to do this because this guy is probably inundated with stuff, and they aren't. Maybe, and probably not every office, but I'm sure a lot more than people realize those guys or girls have more time than you think they do. So, yeah.
Well, and they have whole staff to do it. So no senator's going to read that mail. And you're going to get a stock response. But the powerful part isn't the senator reading the email. It's the staffer going to the senator saying, I've gotten 100 of these emails. We should probably do something.
Kemper.
Yeah, you need a George Kemper. Exactly.
Yeah. So one of the things that you said you wanted to talk about was war powers, which I thought was really interesting. And I would love to get into, again, another one of your posts about the United States not being ready for a peer-to-peer conflict. I'll put it that way instead of saying World War III. Because I think until it's happened and it's cleared that way, it might be a little hyperbolic to call it World War III. But I want to know what you meant when you said you wanted to talk about world war powers, and then in what context. Is it because of the current global climate, or is this something that you just maybe have a knack for wanting to talk about?
Oh, I just like war powers because I think it's a great way to explain the institutional competition between Congress and the president and how that institutional competition has failed. That's why I find it useful. You guys are the military guys. You know what's going on militarily. I'll bow to you on that. But I like speaking about it from a constitutional perspective because I think it's very helpful to understand our system.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think that a lot of people don't even, I'm not definitely an expert on any of this and on anything to the point where you are. You have a doctorate degree in any of this, so you're teaching us, you're educating us in this process. So I do know that for instance, like the global war on terror, people were really upset and still are upset about how that happened. And that there's been all of these conflicts. I mean, the United States is constantly in conflict where we have not actually officially declared war in the sense that everybody has expected and what people think Congress is able to do. And I know one of the things you've mentioned before, too, is how Lincoln basically did all of these things, and then kind of it's easier to do than and beg for forgiveness than ask for permission. Is essentially was Lincoln's MO, right? So where do you think that all of this started, as far as like the president sort of taking the power from Congress on that aspect? Because there's a lot of ways the president can with special military operations and things like that, versus it being an actual being the actual function of our government to put American citizens in harm's way that way.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a really meaty question.
It is.
I think it's helpful to start with the Constitution. So Article 1, Section 8 grants the power to declare war to Congress. Step 1. The comparative power over in Article 2, Section 2 is the Commander-in-Chief clause. So the president is Commander-in-Chief of the military. So you have these two things that are looking at each other. How does this work in practice? Do you have to declare war for every military action? As early as 1800, the answer that we give is no. We have like this quasi-war with France, and we don't declare war against France. And yet it's a limited naval engagement that doesn't require an active war. So that's kind of the legal precedent for the AUMFs in the global war on terror. Those are the authorization for the use of military force. There's actually a constitutional doctrine for that, a limited war, something that's not total war that Congress can grant to a president. What's unusual about the AUMF is how broad it was. Normally, these kind of partial grants are very specific. You may use the Navy to attack X ships, and that's it. And this is the exact opposite. It is such a broad grant of power and was continually interpreted by presidents to be even more broad than Congress had originally intended it. So there is that power. That power exists. And then, of course, there's defensive power. A president does not have to get a declaration of war to protect the country from invasion or from imminent threat. You got that in the prize cases in the Civil War. Was Lincoln okay to blockade southern ports before there was an official declaration of war from Congress? Well, yeah, because the Confederacy had fired upon Fort Sumter. So I think we're talking about different scales here. You have defensive conflicts, but what counts as defensive? Does defensive include offensive actions? And then there is more limited wars or not all-out wars, limited grants of military authority. How far do those go? And then there's actually just, can a president engage troops without any congressional authorization, period? So there's different levels, I think, constitutionally here. But previously, we spoke about this slow development of the presidency, and that's really what it has been. You've had a slow development of war powers, this unbalancing between Congress, which was supposed to be the war-making body, to the president becoming the war-making body, and Congress being weak, the weakest it has ever been on foreign policy and on war.
And kind of to follow that up, I have two questions that are linked together for you. One, why do you think Congress, in 2003 or just after the 2001 and the attacks of 9/11, why don't you think Congress acted to make an actual declaration of war? And then to follow that up, since the precedent's been set for a 20-year war with no declaration of war, do you think, or what would it take, if anything, for Congress to ever kind of get back in the saddle and do what they're supposed to do? Do you think the U.S. would ever actually declare war again, or would it be only in the event of a World War III and it's more of just a symbolic gesture than anything?
Why in 2003 did they do what they did? I have no idea. Except I think that there's that. I have some clues, I think. And one clue is that how do you declare war against a non-state actor? How do you do that? And the second is it's not typical warfare. It's not all-out war. So it doesn't really qualify, I think, in many people's minds in 2003 as a necessary declare war type situation.
I was referring
And then,
to the invasion of Iraq specifically.
okay, well, the same thing, right? The, uh, yeah. I cannot tell you what was in the mind of Congress
Yeah,
in
fair enough.
2003.
Fair enough. I don't think any of
I
us
wish
can.
I wish we could roll back the years on that one. That would make me happy. But you talked about today. Would we ever declare war again short of like World War III? I don't see a lot of hopeful signs, except that there is some bipartisan move in Congress to repeal AUMFs and to more strictly limit them. You see this like Mike Lee and Bernie Sanders, strange bedfellows if there ever were any. And also, there was a moment before Nancy Pelosi left the speakership where I got really hopeful, where she went to Taiwan over the protestations of Joe Biden. And by so doing, set U.S. foreign policy. It's hard to go back on the Speaker of the House going to Taiwan. But regardless of what you think about the specific policy she set, there was something hopeful about the Speaker of the House declaring and kind of setting foreign policy and, by extension, war policy in the future. And I have no idea if that's going to have a long-term effect, but I found that kind of hopeful. What do you think? Do you think they will?
I think it would be a symbolic gesture at best. I think we've kind of gone too far down the rabbit hole. And I feel like any future president wouldn't feel the need to look to Congress for permission, so to speak.
I mean, yeah, I agree with you. I think that a lot of these things have just become formalities now. And if I could kind of jump back to, the question you asked, Dr. Johnston, when you look at Afghanistan and Iraq and you consider the foe in these conflicts, they are not a conventional military. The entirety of the global war on terror was rife with unconventional warfare, guerrilla tactics, all of these things. You've seen it as well when the Russians were there. The United States did a lot to undermine the majority of the war that the Russians were waging there in Afghanistan. And so when you talk about like declaring all-out war, I think that Congress thought that it didn't need to. You go back and read some of these communiques that took place between generals and George Bush, and they talked about, well, we want to use this amount of force. We want to use these different squadrons of helos. We want to use these different fleets or whatever, and they get told no. We're going to limit the action. And obviously there was a heavy leaning on special operations and special forces throughout both of those campaigns. And I think that they may have underestimated the difficulty that they were going to have. It's funny too, because when you consider just the war that was waged for 20 years, and then you look back on the way like the Viet Cong fought the Americans, there's a lot of similarities there. You're talking about a force you'd consider inferior. And probably not a lot of consideration to needing to go to all-out war, like the U.S. Army defending the Fulda Gap there in, the heartland of Europe against the Russians or the Nazis, or going to war there, or whatever those, because the Army still has plans for that on paper. But so maybe that's why. It's just an idea there, considering it. But go ahead, Dr. Johnston.
Oh no, I'm just reacting and saying, yeah, I think you're right. Although I do want to jump back just a second to something George said. It said it's a declaration of war is just a formality at this point. But institutionally, it doesn't have to be that way. Congress has all the constitutional powers it needs to get a grip on war in this country. Everything from appropriations to a refusal to confirm presidential nominations to outright impeachment. Congress has every weapon. It doesn't need any more weapons. It just needs to use them and to have a reason to, and to have, I think, the support of the American people as an institution to claw back power, not against a Democrat or a Republican, but against the President of the United States.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
Well, I have a question for you. I heard this posed to somebody else on another podcast, but the question was, do you would you agree with the statement that the United States does not have domestic policy, that the only policy that America cares about is foreign policy, and American domestic policy is rooted most in how the United States will deal with the rest of the world?
No, 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 I don't agree with that. I think in many ways, foreign policy, voters don't care about foreign policy. I think that's what we actually know from the polls. Voters don't care, and this might be the least foreign policy election we've had in a long time. Voters don't care. And of course, there are congressional committees that deal with foreign relations and with the armed services and intelligence. But there's also big finance, and there's banking, and I would say the majority of what Congress spends its time on is not foreign policy, it's domestic policy. And of course, it's actually really hard to separate those two things, because what America does economically will affect the world and vice versa. So in some ways, our foreign policy is our domestic policy in terms of trade and this and that. But I think it would be a mistake to say that our domestic policy is at service of our foreign policy. It's probably the other way around.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you. And sort of contextualize like what you're saying there, and then going back to the discussion about like declaring war and the use of like special military functions. If you look at like in 2019, Lloyd of London insured $150 million worth of cargo that went through past Yemen a day, $150 million of cargo a day, and limited military engagement by the United States over the past 4 years. Now you look at what Lloyd of London insures, and it's gone down to 50 million a day. And I think that is a great way to understand just the economic impact, I think, as well, on limited military engagement versus a full-on military engagement, taking out Houthi rebels or whatever we're talking about. But I would say, to your point, George, I think that it is more than a formality, because it does have a rippling effect in a greater way than just a soft force going after a high-value target in the Hindu Kush versus here, difference of $100 million worth of cargo being shipped through every day. So there's a lot of impacts that people maybe don't understand.
That's a remarkable stat, by the way. That really tells the whole story, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Wow.
No, absolutely. I think it's pretty crazy, because people are sick and tired of the United States giving money away to Ukraine, and then now there's Israel and Iran, and the United States does not have the stomach for another war. People are fed up with it, and I totally agree with you saying that. They want roads fixed. They want things that are dealt with here in the United States that people actually care about. And so when you talked about the other day, you were talking about is the United States ready for a peer-to-peer conflict? You don't even have to talk about it from a military standpoint, because you look at any historian, any book even from the ancient world talking about war, you have to have the heart of the people into it to be successful. Otherwise, it's just flat out not going to be. And there are examples you can point out through history of this being so. Do you think, would you agree with that? I mean, you're nodding your head, yes, but like, I would love to hear your thoughts on that, because there is such a disdain for anything like that anymore, and that's not the typical American MO,
Oh, yeah, no, I agree with you. You said Americans don't have the stomach for a major conflict anymore. We don't want the money going to Ukraine or to other countries. But also, so much of what we want comes from free trade and free markets abroad, which are patrolled and which are allowed by America's military presence. And so I worry that many of those who want us to kind of come home don't realize that coming home would mean coming home to much less. That the things would change quite a bit. On the topic of, are Americans ready to fight a major global war? Again, you guys are the military guys, but just from a pure civic spirit point, I think the answer is no. There's an interesting moment in Roman history where they go from a purely from the people military to a mercenary military.
Right.
And that's a dangerous tipping point. And sometimes I feel like we're getting to that tipping point where the people are no longer willing or don't think it's worth defending the nation anymore. And No, I agree with you. I kind of think France, when Hitler is coming, right? What is France? How is France in the late 1930s, or I actually don't know what exact year he invades. How are they different than France in World War One? What changes in their capacity, their self belief? There's something that makes them a unique nation, and is the United States heading down that path? It's something I have some worries
You
about.
know, and it's funny when you like that's something I really worry about with the mentality that individuals have for civic service, for lack of a better term. I have heard multiple times now from guys my age, maybe a little bit younger, maybe a little bit older, but in the age where they still would, in theory, join up, historically have joined up if there was a conflict. I have heard probably half a dozen times now of guys saying, if a big war broke out and there was a draft, I would not go and I'd rather sit in jail till the war's over. And just that statement alone and that mentality alone really just, I had to do a double take, and I was like, wait, really? And so I think that a lot of people really think that there's the mentality of, at least I'll be, I don't want to be in jail, but at least I won't be on the front line.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow. I get comments on this sometimes where people will say, I'll bemoan this, and people will say, well, why don't women pick up weapons and start fighting? And I'm like, I think you've lost the plot there. That's not the point. But a society is doomed when one half of it now has the responsibility to both recreate that society and protect it. You
I
can't
was
do it.
just
It can't be done.
I was just going to say that there's a moral issue there for a nation to send its daughters to go to war. Absolutely. I disagree with that wholeheartedly. I don't have, if women want to join the military, that's fine. But just that notion that, well, why don't women take up arms too is, I don't know. I can't really stomach that one too much, because I do think we have specific roles as men and women, although those roles can overlap for sure. But I don't know, something to me morally and ethically about a nation that's sending its daughters to war. I don't know. I can't really stomach that one too much.
Yeah, well, I've kind of done my duty. I've given 3 children to society,
I agree.
and but also I would take up a gun to defend those children. But I don't think the draft is my job. It would be a
I agree
willing
with you.
thing, but the
Well,
draft is,
Totally agree with you.
and while we're on the topic with the draft, I have a kind of tie-in question for you when looping in, constitutional roles and stuff. What is your opinion on the draft in general? I've heard one point of view where a draft shouldn't be in any country, because if countrymen are unwilling to take up arms to defend it, then that nation has lost its right to exist. On the other hand, we've seen where a draft does need to happen. But there was a draft in World War II, but if we didn't have it, the country was still going to join up. It was a duty. It felt, people felt called to do it. So I'm just curious what your kind of take is, both from a moral standpoint and also from a constitutional standpoint.
Great question.
that is a good question, but I frankly haven't thought enough about the
Fair
draft to give you
Fair
a
enough.
great answer. Though my initial response is, could the Union have won the Civil War without the draft? How does the draft play into our military history? Just how significant is it? I actually have no idea.
Yeah,
I don't
that's a
know the
great
numbers
question.
on that.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry to give you an answer that's just, I don't know. I haven't thought about this enough.
No, fair enough. If it's something for you to think about, then I'm glad I still asked it, but I
Yeah.
thought I'd put it out there.
Well, my poor husband's trying to fall asleep tonight. I'll just poke him and be like, "What do you think about the draft?" Oh, I gotta think of an answer to this.
Whenever you make a reel about it, just tag us in it so we can see your answer.
I will. There you go.
If I could, I want to go back to something that you said, that Americans both don't have the stomach for war, but also don't understand the dichotomy and what is American hegemony, and how you and me and everybody that's sort of come before us the last couple generations has lived in a world where America was number one. You can say what you want about any sort of global hegemon. There's a lot of good and bad that goes into that. Obviously, the United States is not without its sins, for sure, just like the British Empire isn't without its sins, etc. But there's absolutely a dichotomy in not wanting to be the world's police and not wanting to have your hand in everything, but also wanting to enjoy a specific lifestyle. And that's something that I also don't think Americans have the stomach for, is to live in a world where we are second-class citizens. What do you think about that?
Oh, that's a very interesting. It's a very interesting thought. To the second point first, I think I live in the state of Utah, and one of the things that's very prominent in the state around the 24th of July is Pioneer Day. And these pioneers were unbelievable in their capacity and in their grit and in their ability to build for future generations. There's quite a selflessness to it, to building for generations. And of course, there's going to be controversy because, Native Americans are here when they get here, all the things. But is my generation capable of building with that same kind of grit for the next generation? And maybe it's simply that we haven't been given the opportunity to do so. We haven't been tested. We haven't been asked. So maybe we would. But I think the key is that we haven't been asked. And could we live in a world where we're second-class citizens? No, I think we would hate it. America has only ever had the experience, or not ever, but for a long time, of not just being a global hegemon, but before that, being the regional hegemon. We have been the regional hegemon for over 100 years, 100 plus years. It is our only experience. It would be a rude awakening to wake up and realize that we're not the top dog, not just in our neighborhood, or not just in the world, but not even in our neighborhood anymore. That's, we don't even know what we have.
Yeah. Oh, totally. I don't even think a lot of the younger generation care. I mean, I can speak to some of the conversations I had with the 18 to 20-year-old age range of airmen, right? A lot of them, frankly, don't care. They don't care if we're not a global power anymore. There's no civic duty, that's inherent in them anymore, right? And I hate to sound like, and George, you'll know what I'm getting at, but like that old guy, the old crusty senior NCO who's like, back when I was a private or whatever, everything used to be better and we were tough, that kind of feels like reality now, maybe more than the older generation. And it's kind of scary when you sit there and listen. Like, I actually had an airman one day on 9/11, this is like maybe 3 or 4 years ago, tell me to basically say I should get over it. And it took a lot in me, frankly, to not reach across the table and slam their face into it, because as somebody who watched it happen and experienced that and served afterwards, it was pretty hard to hear somebody with an American flag on their shoulder say that. I don't know. That just that doesn't really mean much, but it's just like, to me, it's like the mentality of the current younger generation that is serving, and to your point, George, would rather sit in jail than go to war on this country's behalf. And there are a lot of parallels between the United States and Rome, and there's a lot of things that aren't the same at all. But one of those things, I think, is the erosion of what it means to be a citizen. Rome had a crisis in that fashion as well. Being a citizen in the United States has to mean something. And I think you could tie the erosion of what it meant to be a citizen in Rome to its downfall, much to where I think you can find parallels in the erosion of what it means to be an American citizen and the erosion of us as a society. So there are these things, and I just think that this mentality in the younger generation is sort of a indicator of that.
I think we've grown up with so much peace, even with the forever wars. Global peace, kind of an unusual period of peace in the world. But that's the world that was created by, the United States and the United Nations, which we prop up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's a good thing. But we've gotten so comfortable, and we're so bad at history and geography in this country, that I don't think the rising generation has any idea that they live in an unusual moment in history, that the norm is war and aggression and the bigger always beating the smaller instead of a rules-based system and borders staying as they are. That's unusual. And we just, I feel like we're just rejecting the gift that's been given to us. It'll waste away.
I would
I
say,
completely agree.
I pose a question for you, for someone who, is a master in your academic field. Um, and by master, I don't, you're a doctor, obviously, but I mean, the actual term of being, being a master of a profession. Um, what advice would you have for, you know, people who are, in their 20s, in their 30s, who want to, they have this hope, but they don't know how to get involved, or, they have that, or someone who's maybe in high school or early college who they have that itch of, I want to learn more, I want to be involved, but they just don't know where to start, or where to look. What would you say to, I guess, a student? If a student came up to you and said, "Hey, professor, I'm really interested in getting involved and learning. Point me in the right direction."
Civil service. You can't help a people you don't love, and you can't love a people you don't know. So you've got to go serve your people first, so that you can love them, and so that then you can help improve their lives. So first, service. And the first thing I tell my students is go learn the name of your neighbor. You are not a citizen until you know the name of your neighbor. Go learn who they are, learn what issues affect their lives, because now you're a useful voter. Now you can go to the polls and not just think about your pocketbook, but think about what specific issues is my neighbor facing. Maybe I don't have kids, but my neighbor has kids. And so, yeah, we probably should keep funding the public schools and this and that. So service, getting to know the name of your neighbor. I'm interested in some kind of national service requirement, and I don't think it needs to be military. I actually think it should not be military. But some period of time during that most selfish moment in your life, 18 to 21, where you get out of yourself and you go and serve your people. And you see models for this. There's AmeriCorps on one side, but you also see models for this. And, for example, the largest religious denomination here in the state of Utah, between the ages of 18 to 21. They're off for 18 months to 2 years in pretty harsh conditions, serving people. And you don't have to agree with their religious mission to say they're learning something useful. They're learning how to do a hard thing for someone other than themselves. And I want that for all the youth in the United States. And it does not need to be military. It could just be go spend a year cleaning up trails. Beautify America. Go plant trees.
Yeah, we were actually, George and I were talking about this before you jumped on. There are so many people that are actually in the military that don't even need to be there at all. And once they get in and realize what it is, they don't want to be there. So I don't want more people in the military who are forced in and don't want to be there, right? I just think that's a bad situation all around. But I think some sort of civil service, like you said, if you're going to go work for the Forest Service, you're going to work for offices of emergency services, you're going to build highways or whatever it is you're going to do. I think that there should be some sort of mandatory service, and optionally, right, if you do choose to join the military of your own volition, then that would count. And then if you entered into some sort of civil corps, right, and did whatever you did, to your point, George, you would walk away with skills. You would walk away with, some sort of pride potentially in your community. You would understand what it takes to keep that community together. I think that's a great first step in sort of repairing a lot of the damage that Americans have and understanding our system, and then also, just not even knowing your own neighbor, like you said.
Well, and it would do more than that. It would also give us integration. One of the things that is so remarkable about the IDF is that you have people from all walks of life who are forced to live and work together, and they form these bonds. That's what could happen in kind of a service requirement, is you could have a bridging of divides in this country. And I think it's a bipartisan sell, by the way. You can go do military stuff. You could go for 2 years and do a religious thing. Or you could go and you could help resettle refugees. That's an issue I'm passionate about, is refugee resettlement. So spend 2 years and help refugees integrate in their local communities. Help them learn the language and get on the path to citizenship and get their kids into schools and all these things that they need. That's a bipartisan sell. There's something in it for everyone.
No, totally, I agree. I think that I wish there was something like that would come about. I've not seen at least a prominent politician suggest something like that or try to get something like that passed. I don't even know if it would pass, you know?
Yeah, well, it's in some ways contrary to the dominant American idea right now, which is rights, and more rights. And that's good, but it has to be balanced against duties. These duties have to be freely entered into, of course, but maybe some kind of national service requirement would give people the chance to opt into service that they would choose to do. And maybe it would be unconstitutional, maybe it's not possible at all, but at least a national norm on service.
I have a
Yeah,
question.
I'd say
Go ahead, George. No, go ahead.
just to finish up, I think the biggest struggle outside of the constitutional aspect of it, but you mentioned earlier how we're comfortable.
Yeah.
And I'd be curious to see if there was a senator or Congress, man or woman who came out and proposed this idea. It'd be very interesting to see how people would respond just to the idea of it. Because to your point, so many of us have gotten just comfortable, and a lot of people, I think, if they were told, hey, we're going to require you to be selfless for 2 years and serve your country in one fashion or another, we can help you. You can choose kind of based on what skill sets you want to learn or experience. Even with that flexibility, unfortunately feel like a lot of people would have a knee-jerk reaction to that.
Yeah, no, that's probably true. Didn't Mitt Romney speak publicly about something like this fairly recently? Maybe I'm making stuff up. I might be making stuff up, actually. But
We'll fact check you on, yeah.
Yeah, fact check me and tell me if I'm wrong. I probably am.
Dan Bash is going to text me here in a minute and let me know.
Yeah. So, but I think there's, it would teach grit. It would teach love for the country. It would teach love for your people. It would be good things. One of the, just as like, if I were to try and convince someone why this is a good thing, I think about my husband served a religious mission for 2 years in a place he didn't get to choose, which was Tucson, Arizona. And this is a man who's from Boston and despises heat and sun. And he spent 2 years in a suit on a bike in Tucson, Arizona. And the image I have in my mind is people driving past him and throwing their Slurpees at him while he's riding his bike just about every day. How character building. This is, that made him a good person. That was good for him. Was there any service involved in having a Slurpee thrown at you? No. Maybe you made someone's day better. But even something as minimal as that, I think, made him a better adult. Now imagine if he had actually been able to, build houses for someone or something, how much he would have gained from that.
Yeah. To your point, George, I think that even though groceries are more expensive, there are still groceries in the grocery store. And it'll take it not being expensive groceries, but no groceries at all for maybe people to start realizing what they have. The gift that you said, Dr. Johnson. But one of the things that you said, I really wanted to, it made me think, and you're going to correct me if I'm wrong here. But when the Federalist, Anti-Federalist arguments were going on, wasn't a Anti-Federalist argument that the Constitution focused too much on rights and not enough on duties? Is that correct?
Yeah, it was that it focused too much on self-interest and didn't do enough to inculcate civic virtue. So you have this kind of liberal tradition versus this civic republican tradition. And I think it might be the anti-federalist argument that haunts us the most. That, yes, just how far can a government go in inculcating civic virtue? Well, not actually that far. It's a job for civic organizations and for families and for churches and for schools. But also, without it, a rights-based society will collapse under its own weight. But also, self-interest is a permanent facet of human life. And so why not channel it? Why not make it work institutionally? Which was the Federalist response. But I think the Anti-Federalists spoke to a permanent problem in American politics, one that they didn't provide a solution for, which is why they lost, but one which is nevertheless true. How does a rights-based society remain virtuous? Because virtue and agency are flip sides of the same coin, right? You're not virtuous if you're not actually free. If someone puts a gun to your head and tells you to obey the law, you're not virtuous. You're just afraid for your life.
Correct.
But without virtue, freedom, agency leads to anarchy. It leads to chaos. So a free person is both virtuous and an agent unto themselves. You have to be both. And this is actually Mary Wollstonecraft's great insight into liberty, is that the point of liberty is excellence. That's the whole point. The point of liberty is not liberty. The point of liberty is human excellence.
And just to echo everything you said there, it reminded me of one of my favorite quotes from C.S. Lewis, which is, laws cannot make good men, and without good men, you cannot have good laws. And it's kind of that finding that balance where, we need to have, people inspired to do good and do service for their country, but at the same time, if you make a law to force them to do that, that only goes so far.
Right. The perennial struggle of a free people.
Yeah. Was it, again, correct me if I'm wrong here, but John Adams who said that the Constitution was meant for a moral and upright society, right?
Yeah, and again, speaking to that civic Republican concern, they were very aware of this.
Yeah. Have you given thought to a solution where the Anti-Federalists didn't?
I don't actually think, I actually think James Madison is right in the Federalist Papers. You cannot solve this solution with government means, or solve this problem with government means, without snuffing out liberty itself. This is something that has to come exclusively from the private sphere. It has to come in homes, from families. It needs to come from neighborhoods. That's the lifeblood of a republic. It's not the public sphere. So there is no solution, I think, except you need to find virtue in your own life and pursue it.
I was just getting ready to say that earlier we were talking about having some sort of mandatory civil service, and I think that might even just be a reflection on the fact that Americans in general tend to look at government as a solution to problems. And how many people have you ever heard talk about their dad made them go cut lawns all summer, or it made them go volunteer somewhere growing up? I think everybody's parent or an aunt and uncle said something like that, and that's all civil service, right? So it is 100%. It's one of these things where you don't have to lean on the government to do that job for you. It goes back to what you just said about raising good kids. And I'm going to quote my mother-in-law here and say that I'm not raising kids, I'm raising adults, right? And you have to have well-rounded adults, right? So it is 100%. I say this on the podcast all the time. Find something that the government doesn't do or does do. Fix the problem by doing it, or do it better than them and box them out, right? So that you are doing it and taking that liberty, and liberty is what you ought to do, right? And that excellence, and do it at home, right? Make your kid go cut lawns for the neighbor. Introduce him, say, hey, maybe you don't do it for $10 a lawn or whatever,
Oh, and then two things. One, I think you've just solved our debate on national required service, which is you can't do it. That's not going to work, but it should just be a norm, some kind of service norm, not a service requirement. And then the second is that idea. I love the emphasis you're putting on do it in your own life, do it in your own home, because that was Mary Wollstonecraft's great solution. I keep bringing her up because she's like this great liberal thinker that we've totally forgotten, but I think is way better than John Locke and Hobbes, and definitely Rousseau, who sucks. Her basic understanding is that in order for men and women to become excellence doesn't happen in the public sphere. It happens in the domestic sphere, where you are forced to serve a person who is so dramatically different from you. So go home, pursue excellence in the home, and that the public should simply be in service of the private sphere. And I think there is something to that if you can fix homes, and including lifting people out of poverty, so that you have more stable homes, then you can fix this problem.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think everything starts here. I think that's one of the greatest defenses we have towards the erosion of our society, is just being present at home and upholding some sort of morality and ethics. And that's obviously going to look differently to everybody in everybody's home, but having some sort of service to your fellow man, and community, that can look a lot of different ways, and there's no right answer, obviously, so I think you're right. We've solved the problem, right? If everybody would just do it now, we all have kids. And I think too, to your point before, you said you've done your duty. You know, in the ancient world, a man dying in battle was looked at the equivalent of a woman dying in childbirth. You know, that is your duty as a woman, just as a man. It's his duty to defend, you know, his home, his children, his country, all of these things. But I know you're running out of time. I did have one more question for you, but it is kind of a big one, so I don't want to just like hit you with this like gigantic
No, let's do
question. Okay.
Let's do it.
All right. So, trying to be better about understanding American history, right? As somebody who does love history, but my history focus is more on like the ancient world. I love the ancient world. Okay. But I was reading a book on Lincoln, basically because you talk about him so often, actually. But one of the things that was posited in this book about him is that he's the perfect person to save the Union during the Civil War, and that it's sort of spectacular just how we wound up with Lincoln being that person. And my question to you is, do we need a Lincoln to pull America together in the way that he was able to? I learned so much recently about Lincoln, and just how careful he was with what he did, but also just so, like I said before, do it and ask forgiveness versus, asking permission first. There's such a two different people there that worked so well as him. But do you think we need another Lincoln to do that?
I think the first thing I would say is that the more I learn about Lincoln, the more astonished I am by the quality of his character and by his obsession with the rule of law and with his remarkable interpretation and understanding of both the American founding and the U.S. Constitution. I really think he got his constitutional interpretations right. I don't think that a single thing he did during the Civil War was unconstitutional, which is remarkable. I actually think what he did was constitutional. So there's that. But I hope we never have the need for another Lincoln, because he took on such immense powers. He took on the full range of the extraordinary powers, those prerogative powers that are contained, I believe, within Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution that no one else has really even come close to. And it worked because of the quality of his character. I hope we never need another Lincoln, because I'm not sure we'll get someone like him. And so I think the safer answer is to say, you don't need a Lincoln. You don't need a president to save you. This has to happen on a one-by-one basis, the little person at a time. That can have just as much of an impact and be far less dangerous than relying on some kind of hero figure, big man in history. That's a dangerous path. And so I wouldn't look for it again.
I like that answer.
We just need 300 plus million people knowing their neighbors, not one person
Exactly.
saving the country.
Yeah, and you know what? There'd probably be a lot less bloodshed that way.
Yeah.
No, I agree with you, Dr. Johnston. I hope we never have to have another Lincoln, just like I hope. I see so many people online advocating for a civil war, which I just think is asinine in so many ways. A civil war will be fought in the parking lot where your kids go to school. It'll be fought in your neighborhoods. It'll be fought around your grocery stores, on the highways. Your neighbor, will turn against you. All of these things. Would be one of the most ugly ththings. And you think we don't have a stomach for a peer-to-peer conflict with China or something like that? Peer-to-peer or a civil war would be even worse, I think. So, and just if that's you online, please fix yourself.
Oh, Brandon, I agree with you. I'm concerned by the bloodlust I see online. The number of comments or direct messages that I get that are the only way out of this is through violence, like we may have reached that point where it's time to take up arms, is terrifying to me. First, that they've lost hope, that they've gotten to that point where they've so lost hope. And second, that they think that they can find hope in weapons. You won't do it. You won't do it. It is the most rare outcome for a civil war or a revolutionary war to lead to a more stable society than the one you had before, and a more free society than the one you had before. It's a lightning in a bottle kind of a thing. No, I agree with you. I think reject violence at all costs. Maybe not all costs, but reject violence as long and as hard as you can.
Well, George, do you have any closing thoughts, and then we'll let you wrap up with any closing thoughts?
No, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me join in on this. It's been a great conversation.
Can I actually add in one more plea, on top of don't go shooting your neighbor? The second plea, please. The second plea would be, please accept election results. Please accept election results. You don't get back to ballots once you go to bullets. Don't go down that path. Accept election results. Fight the election hard. Fight the campaign hard. Accept election results. Because even if your person loses, and even if, which I do not believe is the case, in fact, I think it's extraordinarily not the case that a national election could be stolen. But even if it was, that is a better outcome than so undermining the democratic process that you now have to resort to bullets. So that would be my plea.
Yeah, that is, I know, would be, it's a hard one for a lot of people to swallow, I think, because there's so many people who think the opposite and would even, argue, well, if the government is that far gone that they're stealing elections, then, we're talking about like duty in, overthrowing that government or whatever. And there would be people that would say that. And I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that that's a whole another conversation for sure. But yeah, anyway, George.
Yeah.
No, thank you. It was a pleasure. I've really enjoyed this. Your videos have been great, and it's been fun to kind of pick your brain and possibly give you some new things to think about. So
no, you have, and thanks for putting up with my rants tonight. It's late, and so I'm just going into lecture mode. But you guys have been such fun conversationalists. Thank you.
No, thank you. And now don't ever apologize, because you have one of the best ways of putting information out there. Listening to you, there's no lost words. There's no wasted words is all I'm getting at. So when you listen to what you have to say. And I appreciate you coming on and being that person to educate me and educate people listening. I would love to have you on again, because I do think that you add a lot of value, and that people with your breadth of knowledge and then with the oratorial expertise that you have are necessary in today in fixing a lot of these issues we have, because you put things in a very good light. And if I could just put a finer point in the last thing you said, it is so important to have faith in our system. Otherwise, you have nothing. And there's one thing that I don't hear from people who discuss the system being so corrupt that it's so far gone. I don't ever see anybody presenting a solution. It's just kill it, and then what comes next, you have no idea. So we have to be smart in navigating these treacherous waters for sure. But thank you so much for your time, Dr. Johnston. I appreciated it immensely. And then if you want to just plug where people can find you real quick. You just started your own podcast, didn't you?
Yes. So I'm on Savvy Politics, SAVY Politics, on Instagram. And then the Center for Constitutional Studies at Utah Valley University is hosting a podcast that I'm the co-host of. It's called This Constitution. It should come out any day now, but I'm not in charge of the technical side. I just show up and talk. Gotcha. One of them. So it should be very interesting. The entire first season is on the presidency.
I love that. Well, I'm definitely going to listen. I'm looking forward to it. So, thank you so much for your time. And
thank you.
When it's done, I'm going to hit stop. Don't leave the lobby right away just because of the upload, but I appreciate you. Thank you.
Cool.